The muzzle swept across the room like a scythe of death, and 23 people hit the floor. Security cameras would later show the exact moment, 3:47 p.m., when a quiet woman in a thrift store jacket stepped forward, raised her hands slowly, and spoke 3 words that would save everyone's life. They'd laughed at her just 40 minutes earlier when she'd walked through that door. Now, as sirens wailed in the distance and her calm voice cut through the chaos, those same people lay frozen, realizing the person they'd mocked was the only thing standing between them and disaster. I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything about how one town thinks about respect, competence, and the danger of judging by appearances. Stick with me to the end and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happened at High Ridge Outfitters needs to be heard everywhere. The bell above the door chimed its tinny welcome as Isla Nguyen pushed into High Ridge Outfitters, bringing with her a gust of October wind that scattered the promotional flyers near the entrance. She paused just inside the threshold, her faded denim jacket still damp from the morning drizzle, and took in the scene before her with practiced eyes that missed nothing. The store sprawled before her like a shrine to American firepower. Gleaming display cases stretched along both walls, fluorescent lights catching on polished steel and polymer, while overhead monitors played looped footage of competitive shooters and hunting expeditions. The air hung thick with the competing scents of gun oil leather and the faint chemical tang from the indoor range that occupied the building's rear section. Behind the main counter, Trent Hawkins noticed her immediately. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having his assumptions challenged. Trent had been working at High Ridge for 3 years and considered himself the store's unofficial gatekeeper. He took one look at Isla, 5'4", wearing that weathered jacket over dark jeans and scuffed boots, her black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and his mouth curved into a smirk. "Hey, Colby," he called to his buddy near the tactical gear section, not bothering to lower his voice. "Looks like someone got lost on their way to the craft store." Colby Chen looked up from his phone, where he'd been live streaming himself, handling various pieces of equipment for his growing audience of weekend warriors and armchair operators. 25 years old, with carefully styled hair, and wearing enough tactical gear to outfit a small SWAT team, Colby lived for content creation and the validation of his online following. His eyes lit up when he saw Isla not with interest, but with the predatory gleam of someone who'd just spotted their next viral moment. "Oh, this is perfect," Colby muttered, swinging his phone around to capture Isla in frame. "Chat's gonna love this." Isla moved deeper into the store with deliberate calm, her gaze systematically cataloging details that others might miss. The emergency exits, one partially blocked by a display rack. The first aid kit mounted on the wall, its inspection tag 3 months out of date. The range safety rules posted by the door, sun-faded and barely legible. Each observation filed itself away in her mind with the precision of someone who'd spent years training herself to see what others overlooked. "Can I help you?" The question came from Beth Morrison, the store's newest hire. 22, fresh out of college with a criminal justice degree, Beth had only been working at High Ridge for 2 weeks and was still finding her footing in the testosterone-heavy environment. She approached Isla with genuine friendliness, a refreshing contrast to the barely concealed mockery radiating from her colleagues. Before Isla could respond, Trent's voice boomed across the store. "I got this, Beth. Why don't you go organize the ammunition inventory or something?" Beth's face flushed slightly, but she stepped back, shooting Isla an apologetic look. Trent sauntered over his boots heavy on the worn carpet and positioned himself directly in Isla's path. Up close, she could smell the mixture of cologne and coffee on his breath. See the slight tremor in his hands that suggested too much caffeine, and not enough sleep. "So," Trent said, tapping his thick fingers against the glass case between them, making the handguns inside rattle slightly. "What can I do for you today? Looking for some pepper spray? Maybe a whistle? We sell real tools here, but I'm sure we can find something more your speed." The laughter from Colby's corner was sharp and ugly. His phone remained trained on them, broadcasting the interaction to hundreds of viewers who were already flooding the chat with emoji reactions and crude comments. Isla's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes. Not hurt or anger, but a kind of patient calculation, like a chess player seeing 10 moves ahead. "Actually," Isla said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made Trent's smirk falter for just a moment. "I'm here for several things. I'd like to review your range safety protocols, check on lane availability, and inquire about your refundable deposits for range time." The words were perfectly reasonable, but something in her delivery, professional, clinical, almost made the room shift slightly. Marcos Rivera, the range technician who'd been cleaning weapons at a back table, looked up sharply. 48 years old, former military Marcos had an eye for competence that 20 years in the service had honed to a razor's edge. The way Isla stood, weight-balanced hands visible but relaxed, these weren't the mannerisms of a casual browser. "Range safety protocols." Trent repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sweetheart, our safety protocols are pretty simple. Don't point the bang-bang end at anyone you don't want to shoot. Think you can handle that?" More laughter, louder this time. Even some customers browsing nearby chuckled, drawn into the spectacle. But then, something unexpected happened. Miss Eleanor Reed, 73 years old, and a grandmother of 6 approached the counter with a question about trigger locks for the pistol she kept for home defense. Trent barely glanced at her, waving her off with an irritated gesture. "In a minute, lady. I'm dealing with something here." The dismissal was casual, thoughtless, the kind of everyday rudeness that had become so common in the store that no one even noticed anymore. No one except Isla, who smoothly stepped aside and turned to Mrs. Reed with genuine warmth. "Trigger locks are in aisle 3, ma'am," she said gently. "But if you're looking for quick access combined with safety, you might want to consider a biometric safe instead. They're a bit more expensive, but much more practical if you have grandchildren who visit." Mrs. Reed's face lit up with gratitude. "Oh, that's exactly my situation. My daughter brings the little ones every weekend." As Isla walked with Mrs. Reed toward the safe display, explaining the different options with patience and expertise, Trent's face darkened. He didn't like being shown up, especially not by someone he'd already categorized as beneath notice. But before he could intervene, the front door chimed again. Hank Garrison, the store's owner, emerged from his office like a bear leaving its den. 61 years old, with a belly that strained against his high-ridge outfitter's polo shirt, and a face permanently reddened from a combination of blood pressure medication and barely suppressed rage. Hank ran his store the way he'd run it for 15 years, with corners cut, rules bent, and an iron fist wrapped in a glad-handing smile. "What's all the commotion out here?" Hank boomed, his voice filling the space. His eyes landed on Isla, took in her modest appearance, and his expression shifted to one of patronizing amusement. "Well, hello there, princess. What can we do for you today? Looking for something with a little less kick? We've got a nice selection of .22s that won't bruise that delicate shoulder." The condescension was thick enough to choke on. Colby's stream was eating it up, the viewer count climbing, as people sensed drama brewing. Comments flooded in, "LOL, she's so out of place. Bet she's never held a gun. This is hilarious." Isla finished helping Mrs. Reed select an appropriate safe, then turned back to face Hank with the same unruffled calm she'd maintained since walking in. "As I was explaining to your employee, I'm here to review your range safety setup and potentially book some lane time." "Review our safety setup." Hank's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "And what makes you qualified to review anything in my store?" It was the perfect setup for a crushing put-down, the kind of moment Hank lived for, putting someone in their place, establishing dominance, reinforcing the pecking order that kept his world simple and understandable. But before Isla could respond, a soft ping echoed from the store's computer behind the counter. Beth, who'd been trying to stay invisible near the register, glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "Mr. Garrison," she said, her voice tight with worry. "You need to see this." Hank stomped over, still glowering. His eyes scanned the email that had just arrived from the County Safety Commission. The color drained from his face as he read, "Random compliance review scheduled for today. Inspector will arrive within the next 2 hours." The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. Trent's cockiness evaporated. Colby lowered his phone slightly, suddenly aware that he might be documenting something that could go very wrong for the store. Marcos stood up from his workbench, his expression grave. These random reviews had been instituted after a shooting range accident in the neighboring county 6 months ago, one that had resulted in a death and a 7-figure lawsuit. Hank's eyes darted around the store, mentally cataloging every corner cut, every delayed maintenance item, every safety protocol that existed more on paper than in practice. The expired first aid kit Isla had noticed. The blocked emergency exit, the ventilation system in the range that hadn't been properly serviced in 8 months, the ammunition stored improperly in the back room. Each violation carried fines, but accumulated violations could mean losing their license to operate the range, a loss that would cost the store 40% of its revenue. "Everyone act natural," Hank hissed, but his voice cracked slightly. "Trent, go check the range. Make sure everything's proper. Colby, put that damn phone away. Beth, print out all our safety documentation, the updated versions." "We don't have updated versions," Beth whispered, her face stricken. Isla watched this scramble with an unreadable expression. She walked slowly along the display cases, her fingers trailing just above the glass, and paused at the range entrance where the safety rules were posted. "Your eye protection requirement sign is from 2019, she observed mildly. "The state updated those requirements in 2021. Trent, who'd been heading for the range, stopped and turned. "How would you know that?" "Also," Isla continued, as if she hadn't heard him, "that ventilation grate has dust buildup visible from here. When's the last time your air filtration system was serviced? The particulate matter from discharged rounds can create serious respiratory issues without proper ventilation. I assume you have the maintenance logs readily available for the inspector." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Colby's stream chat had gone quiet, viewers sensing that something significant was happening. Marcos stepped forward, his military bearing evident, and studied Isla with new interest. "Who are you?" he asked directly. Before she could answer, the situation escalated dramatically. Rory Patterson burst through the front door, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. 34 years old, recently divorced, and carrying enough liquid courage to make terrible decisions, Rory was a regular customer who usually came in to blow off steam at the range. Today, he was past the point of steam and well into dangerous territory. "Hank!" he shouted, weaving slightly. "I want my usual lane and I want it now. Had a shit day and I need to shoot something." "Rory!" Hank started, his voice artificially jovial but strained. "Maybe today's not the best." "Don't tell me what day it is," Rory snarled, pushing past Trent toward the range entrance. In his aggressive movement, he knocked into a display stand, sending boxes of ammunition scattering across the floor. The crash was tremendous, but what happened next was worse. Rory had his everyday carry pistol in a hip holster perfectly legal, normally not an issue. But in his intoxicated fumbling to step over the scattered boxes, he reached for the wall to steady himself, his other hand instinctively going to his weapon. In one horrifying moment, he drew the pistol not with intent, but with the clumsy reflexiveness of someone too impaired to control their actions. The muzzle swept across the room. 23 people were in the store at that moment. Every single one of them recognized the lethal arc of that barrel as it passed over them. Mrs. Reed gasped. Beth dropped behind the counter. Colby's phone clattered to the floor as he dove sideways. Even Trent, for all his bravado, took an instinctive step back. But Isla moved forward. Not aggressively, not quickly enough to startle. She raised her hands slowly, palms visible, and her voice cut through the chaos with crystalline clarity. "Rory, look at me." 3 words. Simple, direct commanding without being confrontational. Rory's glazed eyes swung toward her, the gun still in his hand, but no longer sweeping. Everyone in the store held their breath. "You're going to holster that weapon now." Isla continued, her voice maintaining that same calm authority. "Slowly, safely, because you're better than this moment." Something in her tone, not fear, not anger, just absolute certainty, penetrated Rory's alcohol fog. His hand trembled, but he began to lower the weapon. The entire sequence took maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. When the gun finally settled back in its holster, the collective exhale was audible. "Now," Isla said, still in that same measured tone. "You're going to sit down on that bench by the door. Marcos is going to get you some water. And we're going to make sure everyone stays safe today." Rory, suddenly aware of what had just happened, of how close he'd come to catastrophe, sank onto the bench with his head in his hands. "Oh God," he muttered. "Oh God, I didn't mean—" "I know," Isla said quietly. She turned to Marcos, who was already moving. "Call Deputy Owens. Tell him we need him here, but the situation is contained. No emergency, but his presence is required." Marcos didn't question how she knew Deputy Owens by name. He just pulled out his phone and made the call. Meanwhile, Hank stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions, relief, fear, anger, confusion. Trent hadn't moved from where he'd retreated. Colby was slowly picking up his phone, which was still streaming, though he seemed to have forgotten about it entirely. Beth emerged from behind the counter, her training finally overcoming her shock. "Should I engage the range lockdown?" she asked Isla, directly bypassing her boss entirely. "Yes," Isla confirmed. "No one goes into the range until Deputy Owens clears it. And Beth, you did exactly the right thing taking cover. De-escalation only works when the de-escalator is safe first." The praise delivered so matter-of-factly in the midst of chaos made Beth straighten slightly. She moved to the range control panel, with new purpose entering the lockdown code with steady hands. The red light above the range entrance began flashing, and the automatic locks engaged with a definitive click. It was at this precise moment that the front door chimed again. Everyone turned, expecting Deputy Owens, but instead, a woman in a severe black suit entered. Mid-40s, sharp-featured, carrying a tablet, and wearing a County Safety Commission badge on a lanyard. Avery Park Regional Compliance Auditor had arrived. She took in the scene. Rory slumped on the bench, the scattered ammunition, the tension thick enough to cut, and Isla standing in the center of it all with perfect composure. "I see I've arrived at an interesting time," Avery said dryly. Her eyes found Isla, and something like recognition flickered across her face. "Though it appears someone here knows proper crisis management protocol." Hank finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. "This isn't... We just had a small incident. Everything's under control." "I can see that," Avery interrupted. She pulled up something on her tablet. "I also see from the security feed that was streaming to social media," she nodded at Colby, who went white, "that this small incident involved a drawn weapon in a crowded retail space. Would anyone care to explain?" The weight of the moment settled on everyone like a physical presence. This wasn't just about fines anymore. This was about the store's very existence. Hank's corner-cutting Trent's negligence, the accumulated small failures that had led to this moment, all of it was about to come crashing down. But Isla stepped forward, her voice professional and clear. "Ma'am, what you witnessed was a textbook de-escalation of a situation that arose from multiple systemic failures. If you'll allow me, I can walk you through both what went wrong and what went right, as well as immediate corrective actions that can be implemented." Avery studied her for a long moment. "And you are Isla Nguyen," she replied simply. "Community safety instructor." The title hung in the air for a moment before Avery's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. She pulled up something else on her tablet, her eyes widening slightly. "Isla Nguyen, former collegiate marksmanship champion, 3-time national competitor, certified range safety officer, consultant for..." "Interesting. You've worked with the sheriff's department on their school safety initiatives." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Trent's jaw dropped. Colby fumbled his phone, nearly dropping it again. Even Marcos, who'd suspected something, looked impressed. But it was Hank's expression that was most dramatic, a mixture of horror at how badly he'd misread the situation, and desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this expert might help him salvage his business. "You knew," he accused, his voice cracking. "You knew there was an inspection today." "I knew there was a compliance review scheduled for this quarter," Isla corrected. "I didn't know it was today specifically. I came here because Mrs. Reed," she nodded at the elderly woman, "is my neighbor. She mentioned she was nervous about coming here alone to ask about safety equipment. I offered to accompany her." Mrs. Reed nodded vigorously. "She's helped me with my home security setup. Such a dear. I had no idea about all her qualifications. She never mentions them." Avery was typing rapidly on her tablet, documenting everything. "Ms. Nguyen, given your expertise and your presence during this incident, I'd like you to participate in this review. Your observations could be valuable." "Wait," Colby suddenly spoke up, his phone still recording. "This is all being streamed, like hundreds of people just watched this whole thing go down." He looked at his screen, his face paling further. Oh shit, it's going viral. The clip of her stopping Rory, it's already been shared like 300 times. Hank grabbed for the phone, but Avery held up a hand. "No, let it stream. Complete transparency might be the only thing that saves your license, Mr. Garrison. The public deserves to see how safety issues are addressed or not addressed in establishments like yours." The front door chimed once more, and Deputy Owen arrived, a tall, competent-looking man in his late 30s who immediately assessed the situation with professional eyes. He saw Rory on the bench, noted Isla's position, and relaxed slightly. "Isla," he greeted her with obvious respect. "Should have known you'd be here. Marcos gave me the basics. Weapons secured. Holstered and Rory's cooperating." Isla confirmed. "But he needs to be evaluated. Public intoxication at minimum, but I think he's more of a danger to himself than others at this point." Deputy Owens approached Rory with practiced calm, and within minutes had him cuffed for his own safety, he explained, and seated more comfortably while they waited for backup to transport him for evaluation. The entire interaction was professional, compassionate, and nothing like the dramatic arrests seen in movies. Colby's stream viewers were riveted. "Now," Avery said, commanding the room's attention, "let's discuss what I've observed so far. Ms. Nguyen, you mentioned systemic failures. Please elaborate." Isla moved through the store with the precision of a conductor directing a symphony, pointing out each issue with clinical detachment. The emergency exit is partially blocked, creating a fire hazard and violating code. The first aid kit is expired in an emergency. Expired supplies could fail or cause additional harm. The range ventilation system shows visible neglect, which means lead particulates and other contaminants aren't being properly filtered. With each point, Hank seemed to shrink further. Trent had gone from cocky to terrified, realizing his job was almost certainly forfeit. But Isla wasn't finished. The safety signage is outdated and non-compliant with current state requirements. There's no visible emergency action plan posted. The ammunition display that Rory knocked over reveals improper storage, different calibers mixed, no proper separation between rimfire and centerfire cartridges. And most critically, she turned to face Hank directly. There's clearly no protocol for identifying and refusing service to impaired customers. We have protocols, Hank protested weakly. Written protocols that no one follows aren't protocols, Isla countered. They're legal fiction, and fiction doesn't prevent accidents. Avery was documenting everything meticulously. Mr. Garrison, are you aware that any one of these violations could result in fines? That accumulated violations could result in license suspension? That an incident involving an impaired customer with a firearm could result in permanent closure and personal liability? Hank's face had gone from red to gray. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd just gambled that he'd never get caught, that inspections would remain perfunctory, that his good old boy network would protect him. But here, with everything documented on stream, with a state inspector watching, with a weapons incident on record, all his shortcuts were coming home to roost. However, Isla said, and that single word made everyone look at her. What we also observed was Beth following proper protocol by taking cover. Marcos immediately responding to de-escalation instructions. Deputy Owens being called promptly and professionally. These are building blocks of a functional safety culture. They just need proper support and systems. Beth stood a little straighter. Marcos nodded slowly. Even Trent looked slightly hopeful. What are you suggesting? Avery asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. I'm suggesting that Mr. Garrison has 15 minutes to commit to immediate corrective actions, or this inspection continues as scheduled with all violations documented. But if he commits publicly on this stream that's currently being watched by, she glanced at Colby's phone, over 2,000 people to specific measurable improvements, perhaps there's room for a collaborative approach rather than a punitive one. The number made Colby double-check his phone. 2300 now. Holy shit, the chat's going crazy. They're calling you the gun store whisperer. Despite the tension, a few people chuckled. The moment of levity was brief but necessary, bleeding off just enough pressure to prevent anyone from making a rash decision. Hank looked around his store at his employees, his customers, the business he'd built, and nearly destroyed through negligence. And something shifted in his expression. What would I need to do? He asked quietly. Isla looked at Avery, who nodded permission. First, immediate actions. Beth becomes interim safety officer effective immediately with a 20% raise to reflect the additional responsibilities. What? Beth gasped. She's the only one who followed protocol during the incident, Isla explained. She deserves recognition and authority. Second, Marcos conducts an immediate range safety assessment and creates a punch list of critical repairs. Nothing opens until those repairs are complete. Marcos straightened. I can do that. Third, Isla continued, all ammunition gets properly reorganized and stored according to current standards. That's a today job, not a tomorrow job. Fourth, new safety signage gets ordered right now with temporary compliance signs posted until the permanent ones arrive. She was building momentum, and everyone could feel it. Even Hank was nodding along, caught up in the possibility of redemption rather than ruin. 5th mandatory safety training for all employees to be completed within 7 days. I'll provide a list of approved courses. 6th implementation of a customer impairment protocol, including the right to refuse service and mandatory reporting procedures. And 7th, she paused, meeting Hank's eyes. You commit to quarterly community safety events, free to the public to rebuild trust and demonstrate commitment to responsible operations. The store was silent, except for the faint buzz of Colby's phone. The stream chat was exploding with comments overwhelmingly supportive of Isla's proposals. Someone had even started a hashtag #GunStoreRedemption. Hank looked at Avery. If I agree to all of this, then I document this as a collaborative intervention with immediate corrective actions implemented, Avery replied. You'll still receive citations for the existing violations, but they'll be noted as addressed. More importantly, you'll avoid suspension or revocation proceedings. And if I don't, Avery's expression was steel. Then I complete my inspection document every violation I find, and based on what I've seen so far, I'll find plenty, and recommend immediate suspension of your range license pending a full investigation. Given the weapon incident that just occurred with an impaired customer, I'd likely recommend permanent revocation. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. But Isla had given Hank something precious, a way to save face while doing the right thing. He could be the owner who recognized problems and fixed them, rather than the one who got shut down for negligence. Beth, Hank said slowly, congratulations on your promotion. Marcos, start that assessment. Trent, he paused, looking at his longtime employee. You're going to lead the ammunition reorganization, and you're going to do it right. Trent nodded quickly, relief flooding his features. He hadn't been fired. He'd been given a second chance. As for the community events, Hank continued, his voice growing stronger. Ms. Nguyen, would you consider leading them paid, of course, consultant rates? Isla considered for a moment. On one condition, they're not just about firearms. They're about complete home safety, everything from proper storage to emergency planning to de-escalation techniques. We teach people how to be safe, not just how to shoot. Deal, Hank said immediately. He turned to Colby's phone, addressing the stream directly. You all heard it here. High Ridge Outfitters is committing to becoming the safest, most responsible gun store in the state. We've got work to do, and we're starting right now. The stream chat exploded with approving comments. Someone donated $50 with the message, "For the Safety Fund." Others started sharing their own stories of unsafe gun stores, praising High Ridge for taking responsibility. What had started as mockery had transformed into something approaching admiration. Deputy Owens, who'd been watching quietly, spoke up. I'll coordinate with the sheriff's office. We've been wanting to implement more community safety programs. This could be a model for the whole county. I'll need documentation of all corrective actions within 48 hours. Avery said, her tone businesslike, but no longer hostile. And I'll be back for a follow-up inspection in 30 days. Ms. Nguyen, I trust you'll be involved in that process. If Mr. Garrison wants me to be, Isla replied. I do, Hank said quickly. God knows we need the help. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Beth threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm, creating checklists and documentation systems on the fly. Marcos's assessment was thorough, but not cruel. He identified critical issues, while also noting what was working well. Trent, chastened and grateful, reorganized ammunition, with an attention to detail no one had seen from him before. Mrs. Reed, who'd watched everything unfold, approached Isla with tears in her eyes. Dear, I had no idea when I asked you to come with me. You saved lives today. You saved lives, Mrs. Reed, Isla corrected gently. If you hadn't asked me to come, I wouldn't have been here. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. Colby had shifted from mockery to documentation, his stream becoming a real-time record of transformation. His viewers were engaged, asking questions, sharing the stream link. What had started as cruel entertainment had become educational content. He approached Isla hesitantly. "I owe you an apology," he said, his phone lowered for once. "I was an ass. I judge people by appearance, by, I don't know, stupid stuff. You just showed me how wrong I can be." "We all make mistakes," Isla replied. "What matters is what we do after we recognize them." "Would you—" He hesitated. "Would you consider doing an interview on stream? My audience, they're asking questions about safety, about what they should look for in a gun store, about de-escalation. You could reach thousands of people." Isla considered, then nodded. "After we finish here." And Colby keep streaming the cleanup and reorganization. Show people that change is possible, that taking responsibility isn't weakness. Your platform could do real good. As the afternoon wore on, word spread through the community. The local news picked up the story from social media. The headline shifted from "Gun Store Safety Scare" to "Local Store Sets New Standard for Safety Reform." Other store owners started calling, asking about the protocols being implemented. The sheriff's office officially announced a partnership for quarterly safety training. By 5 o'clock, when Avery completed her initial review, the store was transformed. Not perfect, that would take time, but fundamentally different. The emergency exits were clear. Temporary safety signs were posted. The ammunition was properly organized. Most importantly, the culture had shifted. Employees who'd been coasting on autopilot were engaged, asking questions, thinking about safety not as an imposition, but as a mission. "Preliminary assessment," Avery announced to the assembled group. While serious violations were identified, the immediate and comprehensive corrective actions taken, combined with the commitment to ongoing improvement, warrant a collaborative approach. Citations will be issued for existing violations, but no suspension proceedings will be initiated contingent on successful follow-up inspection in 30 days. The relief was palpable. Hank actually sagged against the counter. Beth smiled for the first time all day. Even Trent managed a weak grin. But Avery wasn't finished. "I also want to commend Ms. Nguyen for preventing what could have been a tragic incident. Your de-escalation techniques should be studied and replicated. And Mr. Garrison, you should consider yourself fortunate that she was here today. Without her intervention, we'd be having a very different conversation, possibly involving criminal charges. The weight of what might have been settled over everyone." In an alternate timeline, Rory's drunken weapon handling could have ended in death. The store would have been shuttered lives ruined, families destroyed. Instead, they stood in a transformed space, committed to preventing such near misses in the future. As people began to disperse, Isla found herself standing with Marcos, who'd been quietly observing her throughout the afternoon. "Military?" he asked simply. "No," she replied. "But I trained with several veterans. They taught me that competence without humility is just arrogance in disguise, and that the quietest person in the room often sees the most." "They taught you well." He paused. "That de-escalation with Rory textbook doesn't cover it. That was art." "It was necessity," Isla corrected. "When someone's in crisis, meeting aggression with aggression only escalates. You have to give them a path back to safety, not corner them into violence." Their conversation was interrupted by Hank approaching, his demeanor completely changed from the blustering owner who'd first confronted Isla. "Ms. Nguyen, I need to apologize. The way I spoke to you, the assumptions I made, there's no excuse." "There's always an excuse," Isla replied. "What matters is choosing not to use it. You chose to change rather than defend. That takes courage. Will you really help us with the safety programs?" "If you're really committed to change, yes. But understand, this isn't a quick fix. Safety culture takes months to build and seconds to destroy. Every day will require choosing to do things right rather than easy. After today, Hank said soberly, I think we all understand that easy choices lead to hard consequences. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the store windows, Colby wrapped up his stream with over 5,000 viewers, the largest audience he'd ever had. His final words would later be clipped and shared thousands of times. What we witnessed today wasn't just about gun safety. It was about human safety, how we treat each other, how we judge each other, how we can choose to be better. A woman walked into this store and got laughed at for how she looked. An hour later, she'd saved lives, transformed a business, and taught us all something about respect. If you take nothing else from this stream, take this competence doesn't announce itself with swagger. Sometimes it walks in wearing a thrift store jacket and changes everything with quiet expertise. The stream ended, but the impact was just beginning. Within hours, the footage would be picked up by national news outlets. Safety organizations would request copies for training purposes. Other stores would begin implementing similar protocols. The hashtag #HatGunStoreRedemption would trend, sparking conversations about safety culture across the country. But in that moment, as the last customer left and the employees finished their reorganization, Isla stood in the doorway she'd entered just hours before. The same bell chimed as she prepared to leave, but everything else had changed. Beth approached her one last time. Thank you, the young woman said simply. Not just for the promotion or for saving the store. Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. It's not about being the loudest or the biggest. It's about being right when it matters and helping others get there too. Isla smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her face. You had it in you all along, Beth. You just needed someone to see it. Now you get to be that person for someone else. As she stepped out into the October evening, Isla could hear the sounds of continued work inside the store. Not the frantic scramble of people avoiding punishment, but the purposeful activity of people building something better. She'd walked in planning to help her neighbor with a simple purchase. She was leaving, having prevented a tragedy, transformed a business, and perhaps most importantly changed how a community thought about safety, respect, and the danger of judging by appearances. The parking lot was nearly empty now, but as Isla reached her modest Honda Civic, another thing that would have been mocked had anyone noticed, she found Deputy Owens waiting. That was something to see, he said. I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, and I've never seen someone de-escalate a situation that cleanly. Rory could have killed someone. Rory was hurting, Isla replied. Divorce, job loss, drinking to cope. The gun was just the symptom. The disease was desperation without support. That's what the community programs need to address, not just safe gun handling, but recognizing crisis before it becomes catastrophe. Owens nodded thoughtfully. Would you consider working with the department more formally? We could use someone with your skills teaching de-escalation to our officers. Let's see how the community programs go first, Isla said. Build trust with the public, then expand from there. Too much, too fast, and people resist. But slow, steady change, that sticks. As she drove away, Isla didn't see Hank standing in the window watching her go with something approaching awe. She didn't see Beth carefully filing all the new documentation, already planning improvements beyond what had been mandated. She didn't see Marcos teaching Trent proper ventilation maintenance, their previous antagonism replaced by shared purpose. And she didn't see Colby starting his next stream, this one titled How I Learned to Stop Judging and Start Learning, which would become his most successful content ever. 3 days had passed since the incident at High Ridge Outfitters, but the reverberations continued to spread through the community like ripples on a pond. Isla arrived at the store early Saturday morning, to find something unexpected. A line of people waiting outside, at least 30 strong, holding coffee cups and chatting quietly in the cool morning air. Beth was already there, unlocking the door with a set of keys that still felt foreign in her hands. She spotted Isla and hurried over, her face a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "They started showing up an hour ago," she said breathlessly. "They heard about the free safety class. I didn't think we'd advertised it yet." "Word travels," Isla replied, studying the crowd. She recognized some faces, neighbors' parents from the local school, even a few teenagers with their guardians. But what caught her attention was the man at the front of the line, someone she hadn't expected to see again so soon. Rory Patterson stood there, sober, showered, wearing clean clothes and an expression of profound embarrassment. Beside him was a woman Isla didn't recognize, mid-30s professional bearing, watching Rory with a mixture of concern and support. "Ms. Nguyen," Rory said as she approached, his voice rough with emotion. "I needed to come, to apologize properly, and to learn. My sister Sarah." He gestured to the woman beside him. "She saw the video, flew in from Denver to check on me." Sarah extended her hand, her grip firm and grateful. "Thank you for saving my brother's life, and probably several others." "Your brother saved his own life when he chose to listen," Isla corrected gently. "Today he's choosing to learn. That's what matters." The door opened fully, and the crowd began filing in. Hank stood behind the counter, but his usual position of authority looked uncomfortable on him now, like a suit that no longer fit quite right. He'd spent the last 3 days reassessing everything about how he ran his business, and it showed in the uncertainty of his posture. "We've reorganized the classroom space in the back," he told Isla. "Marco set up chairs for 40, but we might need more." They definitely needed more. As the official start time approached, the store filled beyond capacity. The local news had sent a reporter. 3 other gun store owners from neighboring towns had come to observe. Deputy Owens arrived with 2 other officers, all in civilian clothes there, to learn rather than enforce. But the most surprising arrival came just as Isla was about to begin. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, corporate bearing, calculated movements, the kind of person who didn't usually frequent high-ridge outfitters. He entered quietly, taking a position at the back, but Isla noticed how Hank's face went pale when he saw him. "That's Mitchell Brennan," Beth whispered to Isla. "Regional manager for the sporting goods chain that's been trying to buy out independent stores. He's probably here to scout for weaknesses." Isla nodded, but didn't let it change her approach. She stepped to the front of the assembled group, and conversations gradually died away. Without raising her voice, without demanding attention, she commanded the room simply by being present and prepared. "Before we talk about safety," she began, "I want to talk about respect. 3 days ago, many of you saw or heard about what happened here. Some of you watched it live. But what the cameras captured was just the climax of a story that had been building for years, a story about what happens when we stop seeing each other as human beings, deserving of dignity." She moved through the crowd rather than standing behind a podium, making eye contact, creating connection. "Firearms are tools. Nothing more, nothing less. They don't have politics, they don't have attitudes, they don't care about your background or your beliefs, but they demand respect, not fear, not worship, but respect. And that respect starts with respecting ourselves and each other." A hand went up, a teenage boy, maybe 16, nervous but determined. "My dad says guns are about power, about not being a victim." "What's your name?" Isla asked. "Tyler." "Tyler, your dad's not wrong, but he's not complete either. A firearm can provide security, yes, But real power isn't about having a weapon. Real power is knowing when not to use it. Real power is de-escalation. Real power is what Deputy Owens does every day, protecting people without pulling his weapon 99% of the time. Owens nodded appreciatively from his position near the wall. The teenager seemed to consider this, then asked a follow-up that made several adults shift uncomfortably. But what about when someone's trying to hurt you? Don't you need a gun then? Isla smiled slightly. Let me show you something. She moved to the center of the room, creating space around her. I need a volunteer, someone big and strong. After a moment's hesitation, Trent stepped forward. Despite everything that had happened, or perhaps because of it, he wanted to be part of the transformation. At 6'2" and over 200 pounds, he towered over Isla's 5'4" frame. Trent's going to try to grab me, Isla explained. Slowly, safely, but with intent. This is a demonstration, not a competition. Trent approached carefully, reaching for Isla's shoulder. In a movement so smooth it seemed like choreography, she redirected his momentum, stepped aside, and suddenly Trent found himself off balance, stumbling past her. She hadn't struck him, hadn't overpowered him, she'd simply used physics and positioning. That's Aikido, she explained to the amazed crowd. A martial art built entirely on redirecting aggression rather than meeting it with force. I've been practicing for 15 years. In all that time, I've had to use it outside of training exactly twice. You know why? The room was silent, waiting. Because I've de-escalated hundreds of potential confrontations with words, body language, and situational awareness. The best fight is the one that never happens. The best shot is the one never fired. The best crisis is the one prevented. Mitchell Brennan was typing rapidly on his phone, and Hank watched him with growing anxiety. But Colby, who was once again streaming this time with Isla's permission, caught something the others missed. Brennan wasn't typing criticism or corporate intelligence. He was texting his team. Cancel the acquisition proposal for High Ridge. They're becoming something special. The class continued with Isla covering the 4 fundamental rules of firearm safety, but she did it through stories rather than lectures. Each rule came with real examples, both positive and negative, making the abstract concrete and memorable. She involved the audience, asking questions, encouraging participation, breaking down the barriers between expert and student. When she got to safe storage, Mrs. Reed raised her hand. I bought that biometric safe you recommended. My grandchildren were fascinated by it. The technology made it seem like something from a spy movie rather than a boring lockbox. That's perfect, Isla said. When safety becomes interesting rather than oppressive, people embrace it. Kids especially respond better to look at this cool technology than don't touch that. Rory's sister Sarah spoke up. What about someone like my brother? How do we recognize when someone shouldn't have access to weapons even temporarily? The question hung heavy in the air. Rory himself looked down ashamed, but listening. Isla approached the siblings with compassion, evident in every movement. Rory, would you be willing to share what you were experiencing that day? Only if you're comfortable. He looked up, met her eyes, then nodded slowly. I'd lost my job that morning. 3rd one this year. My ex-wife had just sent papers demanding more alimony I couldn't pay. I felt like everything was crushing me. The gun made me feel like I had some control, some power. But I wasn't thinking straight. I could have killed someone. I could have killed myself. The raw honesty silenced even the skeptics in the room. This wasn't abstract policy discussion. This was human pain and near tragedy made real. Sarah took her brother's hand, and he squeezed it gratefully. Red flag laws exist for exactly these situations. Isla explained. Temporary removal of firearms during crisis periods, not as punishment, but as protection. Just like we wouldn't let someone drive drunk, we shouldn't let someone handle weapons when they're in crisis. The key is making it temporary, supportive, and non-punitive. But who decides? This from one of the visiting gun store owners, his tone challenging, but not hostile. Who gets to say someone's too unstable? In Rory's case, he decided, Isla replied. After the incident, he voluntarily surrendered his firearms to Deputy Owens for safekeeping until he completes counseling. That's the ideal self-recognition and voluntary action. But when that's not possible, there need to be clear legal pathways that protect both rights and lives. The discussion that followed was heated but respectful. Different viewpoints emerged, some conflicting sharply, but Isla moderated with skill, keeping focus on shared values, safety, responsibility, community protection, rather than divisive politics. 90 minutes into what was supposed to be an hour-long class, no one had left. In fact, more people had arrived standing along the walls when all seats were taken. The atmosphere was electric, with engagement so different from the mockery and tension of 3 days ago that it seemed like a different universe. Then something unexpected happened. Tyler, the teenager, who'd asked the early questions, raised his hand again. Miss Nguyen, I've been watching videos online. People doing tactical training, room clearing, combat shooting. It looks so cool, and they make it seem like that's what responsible gun ownership looks like. Before Isla could respond, Colby spoke up from where he'd been streaming. I used to make those videos, he admitted to the room. Tactical gear reviews speed shooting, making everything look like a video game. After what happened here, I deleted them all. That stuff, it's fantasy. It's playing soldier without understanding what soldiers actually do. Marcos stepped forward, his military bearing evident. 20 years in the Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan. You want to know what real tactical training taught me? How to avoid engagement whenever possible. How to protect civilians. How to de-escalate. The best Marines I knew were the ones who could walk through a hostile market and leave everyone calmer than they found them. The revelation landed powerfully, especially with the younger attendees who'd been fed a steady diet of tactical mythology through social media and video games. Tyler looked thoughtful, processing this new perspective. But surely, Mitchell Brennan finally spoke from the back, his corporate voice cutting through. There's a market for tactical training. People want to feel prepared. Prepared for what? Isla challenged gently. Statistical likelihood of home invasion is minimal. Statistical likelihood of needing combat skills is essentially 0 for civilians, but statistical likelihood of accident, suicide, or escalation turning deadly, much higher. So what should we really be preparing for? Brennan seemed taken aback by the directness of the response, but also intrigued. Hank watched the exchange nervously, still worried about corporate predation, but something else was happening. Brennan was genuinely listening, reconsidering learning. What would you suggest? Brennan asked. From a business perspective, I mean. If not tactical fantasies, what do people actually need? Community, Isla replied simply. Connection. Confidence that comes from competence, not equipment. Look around this room. 3 days ago, most of these people didn't know each other. Now they're talking sharing building relationships. That's more valuable than any tactical course. She gestured to the assembled crowd. Rory and Sarah reconnecting over crisis and recovery. Mrs. Reed teaching younger people about responsible ownership. Deputy Owens and civilians building trust. This is what a gun store should provide, not just products, but community infrastructure for safety. Beth had been taking notes throughout, and now she stood up excitedly. We could do regular workshops, not just safety, but related topics. First aid, emergency preparedness, conflict resolution. Make the store a community hub, not just a retail space. The idea sparked immediate discussion. People started volunteering expertise. A nurse offered to teach trauma first aid, a counselor suggested crisis intervention, training a lawyer proposed legal education about self-defense law. The energy was building toward something larger than anyone had anticipated. But then the door chimed, and a new tension entered with the arrival of 3 men Isla didn't recognize, but Hank clearly did. They wore matching jackets with county commissioner badges, and their expressions were stern, official, disapproving. "Mr. Garrison," the lead commissioner said, his voice cutting through the enthusiasm like a blade. "We need to discuss the incident from 3 days ago. The county is considering revoking your business license entirely." The room went silent. All the positive energy evaporated in an instant. Hank's face drained of color, and even Isla felt the weight of this new threat. They'd worked so hard to transform the store, but politics and bureaucracy could destroy it all with a single vote. "Commissioner Reynolds," Hank started, his voice shaking. "We've implemented every recommended change. Changes after the fact don't erase what happened," Reynolds interrupted. "A drunk man with a gun could have killed dozens. The liability to the county is enormous. The safer choice is to shut you down." It was Rory who stood up then, surprising everyone, especially himself. "Commissioner, I'm the drunk man you're talking about. And if this store closes, you're not making anyone safer. You're destroying the only place actually working to prevent another me." Sarah stood beside her brother, adding her voice. "I'm an attorney in Denver. I've seen plenty of liability cases, but I've never seen a business take responsibility and transform this quickly. Shutting them down now would be punitive, not protective." Reynolds remained unmoved. "The video evidence shows clear negligence, multiple safety violations, failure to recognize an obviously intoxicated customer. Any lawyer could make a massive case against the county for allowing this business to continue operating." "Any lawyer could make a case," Sarah agreed. "But they'd lose. Because the video also shows immediate corrective action, successful de-escalation, and implementation of protocols that exceed state requirements. You'd be shutting down a business that's now safer than 90% of gun stores in the state." The legal sparring continued, but Isla noticed something else. Commissioner Reynolds kept glancing at his phone, and his expression was growing increasingly uncomfortable. She caught Colby's eye and mouthed, "How many viewers?" He checked his stream, and his eyes widened. He held up his phone, showing the number 12,000 and climbing. The confrontation was being watched live by more people than lived in their entire town. "Commissioner," Isla spoke up, her calm voice cutting through the argument. "Are you aware that this discussion is being broadcast to thousands of voters?" Reynolds froze, then slowly turned to see Colby's camera. His political instincts kicked in immediately, attacking a small business that was actively reforming in front of thousands of constituents was career suicide. But it was Commissioner Walsh, the younger of the 3, who provided an unexpected lifeline. "Perhaps we should observe the rest of this safety class before making any decisions. See the transformation for ourselves." Reynolds wanted to object, but the political calculus was obvious. They were trapped by transparency, forced to actually evaluate rather than simply condemn. He nodded stiffly and took a seat, followed by the other commissioners. The class resumed, but the dynamic had changed. Now it wasn't just about education, it was a performance that could determine the store's survival. Isla felt the pressure, but didn't let it change her approach. If anything, she became more thorough, more compassionate, more effective. She moved into practical demonstrations, setting up scenarios at the range with dummy weapons. Each scenario was designed to teach judgment, not just technique. When to draw versus when to retreat. How to communicate with law enforcement if you're armed during an emergency. How to secure a weapon when children are present. Tyler volunteered for a scenario where he played a homeowner hearing a noise at night. His instinct was to grab the dummy gun immediately, But Isla walked him through better options, calling 911 first, identifying the sound, considering that it might be a family member or pet. By the end, he understood that reaching for a weapon should be the last resort, not the first instinct. Commissioner Walsh was taking notes, genuinely engaged. Even Reynolds seemed to be softening, watching how the diverse crowd, young and old, experienced and novice, conservative and liberal, were all learning together, respecting each other despite differences. Then came the moment that would later be replayed thousands of times online. A man burst through the door, angry, shouting, waving what looked like a weapon. The crowd reacted with panic, some diving for cover, others freezing. But Isla moved with liquid grace, positioning herself between the threat and the crowd while calling out clear, calm instructions. "Everyone stay calm. Move to the walls. Do not engage." The intruder continued, shouting something about his rights being violated, the government overreach, the tyranny of regulations. He was clearly unstable, possibly dangerous. Commissioner Reynolds reached for his phone to call police, but Isla held up a hand. "Sir," she addressed the intruder with the same calm she'd shown with Rory days earlier. "You seem upset. Would you like to tell us what's wrong?" The man paused, confused by the lack of confrontation. "They're trying to take our guns. These commissioners, they're here to shut down our rights." "I understand you're concerned," Isla said, taking a slow step forward. "But look around. We're having a conversation about safety, not confiscation. Would you like to join us? Share your perspective." The de-escalation was masterful. Within minutes, the man Fred Thompson, a local veteran with PTSD, who'd been triggered by rumors of the store closing, was seated his weapon, which turned out to be a painted water gun he used for protest props, set aside, participating in the discussion. But the real shock came when Marcos recognized him. "Fred, Marine Corps, you were at Fallujah 2nd Battalion." Fred's eyes widened. "Marcos, Jesus, man, I didn't recognize you. How long's it been?" The reunion was emotional, two veterans finding each other after years, bonding over shared service and shared struggles. Fred broke down, admitting he'd been struggling, that the rumors of gun confiscation had triggered his worst fears about government control. "This is why community matters," Isla told the room, which had grown quiet, watching the two veterans embrace. Fred didn't need confrontation. He needed connection. How many crises could we prevent if we just knew our neighbors better? Commissioner Walsh stood up. "I've seen enough. Commissioner Reynolds, I move that we not only allow High Ridge Outfitters to remain open, but that we officially commend them for their innovative approach to community safety. This should be a model for other businesses." Reynolds, aware of the cameras and the moment, nodded slowly. "I second the motion. But," he added, looking at Hank, "we'll expect quarterly reports on safety initiatives and community programs." "You'll get them," Hank promised, relief flooding his features. The class concluded with something unprecedented, spontaneous applause from over 60 people, including the commissioners. But Isla wasn't done. She had one more lesson to teach. "Before everyone leaves," she said, "I want to address something. Many of you have called me an expert, a hero even. But I'm neither. I'm someone who learned from others, who practiced, who prepared. Every single person in this room has that same capacity. The question is whether you'll choose to develop it." She looked directly at the camera Colby was holding. "To everyone watching online, your local gun store could be like this. Your community could have these conversations, but it requires stepping past fear and mockery, past assumptions and prejudices. It requires seeing each other as human beings worthy of respect, regardless of appearance or background." Mitchell Brennan approached as people began to disperse. "Ms. Nguyen," I'd like to discuss something with you. My company has been reconsidering our approach to the firearms retail market. Instead of acquiring stores, we're thinking about supporting community-based safety initiatives. Would you consider consulting on a national level? The offer was stunning corporate backing for the kind of transformation she'd achieved here. But Isla's response was characteristic. I'll consider it, but only if the focus remains on community building, not profit, and only if stores like High Ridge maintain their independence and character. As the crowd finally thinned, Fred Thompson approached Isla with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, I came here to cause trouble. I was so angry, so scared, but you didn't see me as a threat. You saw me as a person in pain. Thank you." "We're all people in pain sometimes," Isla replied gently. "The lucky ones find help instead of harm." The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating a transformed space. Where mockery had reigned 3 days ago, respect now flourished. Where negligence had threatened disaster, diligence now prevented it. The store hadn't just survived, it had become something unprecedented, a model for what was possible when communities chose connection over division. But as Isla prepared to leave, Avery Park arrived for an unscheduled follow-up. Her expression was serious, official, concerning. She pulled Isla and Hank aside, speaking quietly but urgently. "We have a problem. The State Attorney General's office has taken interest in this case. They're considering using it as a test for new liability laws. If they proceed, High Ridge could face criminal charges despite all these improvements." And Isla, she paused, meeting her eyes. "They're particularly interested in why you happened to be here that day. They think this might have been staged." The accusation landed like a bomb. Everything they'd built, all the progress they'd made, suddenly stood on shaky ground. Isla felt the weight of injustice. How doing the right thing could be twisted into something suspicious. How transformation could be seen as manipulation. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything they'd accomplished. Hank's face went from relieved to stricken in the span of a heartbeat, while Isla remained perfectly still, processing the implications of what Avery had just revealed. The State Attorney General thinking this was staged, it was absurd, but absurdity had never stopped legal proceedings before. "That's insane," Hank said, his voice cracking. "We have video evidence of everything. Colby's streamed the security cameras. How could anyone think this was planned?" Avery pulled out her tablet, showing them an official document. "The AG's office finds it suspicious that a nationally recognized safety expert just happened to be present during a crisis that resulted in massive positive publicity for a previously troubled business. They're calling it too convenient, and suggesting it might have been a marketing stunt that endangered public safety." From across the store, Colby noticed the tense conversation and approached his phone, still in hand, though he'd stopped streaming. "Everything okay? You all look like someone died." "Someone might as well have," Hank muttered, then explained the situation. Colby's expression shifted from concern to outrage. "Are they serious? I was streaming the whole thing? You can't fake that kind of real-time interaction. My viewers would have called it out immediately if something seemed staged." "The AG's office doesn't understand streaming culture," Avery said. "They see a viral video that benefited the store and assume manipulation. They've subpoenaed all footage and they want to depose everyone involved starting Monday." Isla finally spoke, her voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "Let them investigate. The truth doesn't need defending, just revealing. But Hank, you need a lawyer, a good one." "I'll represent the store," Sarah said, having overheard the conversation. She'd been helping her brother Rory fill out some paperwork nearby. "Pro bono. This is exactly the kind of government overreach that makes people distrust the system." Rory looked at his sister with surprise. "You sure this could get messy?" "Someone waved a gun around because of me being drunk and this woman saved everyone," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm not letting her get railroaded for it." The group was so focused on their discussion that they didn't notice the man who'd been sitting in the corner of the store for the past hour, apparently browsing ammunition, but actually listening to everything. He stood up now, approaching with the kind of deliberate movement that suggested official business. "Ms. Nguyen," he said, producing a badge. "Agent David Chen, FBI. I'm not here about the AG's investigation. I'm here about something else entirely." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Hank looked like he might faint. Even Isla's composure flickered for a moment. An FBI agent had been sitting in their store watching, listening, and they'd had no idea. "Before anyone panics," Agent Chen continued, noting their expressions, "you're not in trouble. At least not from us. But we've been tracking some concerning online chatter. The incident here has attracted attention from extremist groups. Some see Isla Nguyen as a government plant trying to restrict gun rights. Others see the store as a symbol of capitulation to state control." "That's ridiculous," Beth said, joining the growing circle. "We're just trying to be responsible." "Extremists don't do nuance," Chen replied. "We've intercepted communications suggesting someone might target this store, or Ms. Nguyen specifically. We think it's mostly talk, but given recent events, we can't ignore it." Isla absorbed this information with the same calm she'd shown during the original crisis. "Do you have specific threats or just general chatter?" Chen pulled out his phone, showing them screenshots from various forums and chat rooms. The language was violent, paranoid, filled with conspiracy theories about gun confiscation and government control. Isla's name appeared frequently painted as everything from a crisis actor to a foreign agent. "This is insane," Colby said, reading over their shoulders. "These people are completely detached from reality." "Welcome to the internet," Chen said dryly. "The question is whether any of them will act on these fantasies. We don't think so, but we'd like to position an agent here for the next week just to be safe." "Absolutely not," Hank said immediately. "We just got the community to trust us again. Having federal agents hanging around will destroy that." "He has a point," Isla agreed. "Visible federal presence will confirm every conspiracy theory. It'll escalate rather than de-escalate." Chen considered this. "What would you suggest?" "Community protection," Isla replied. "Local people, familiar faces. If extremists see federal agents, they see oppression. If they see neighbors protecting neighbors, the narrative falls apart." Deputy Owens, who'd been helping direct traffic as people left the class, walked in at that moment. "Did I hear something about protection? What's going on?" After Chen explained the situation, Owens whistled low. "Great, just great. We finally get something positive happening, and the crazies come out of the woodwork." "I can arrange off-duty officers," Owens offered. "Plain clothes just hanging around. Make it look natural." "I'll help too," Marcos said. "I know plenty of veterans who'd be happy to keep an eye on things. We protect our own." The impromptu security planning session was interrupted by Mrs. Reed, who'd been helping clean up after the class. "Excuse me, but there's a news van pulling up outside. Actually, make that 3 news vans." Everyone rushed to the windows. Indeed, 3 different news stations were setting up, and reporters were already approaching people in the parking lot. The story had gone from local interest to state news. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," Agent Chen observed. "Media attention attracts all kinds of unwanted elements." Isla made a quick decision. "We need to control the narrative. Colby, can you stream again? Get ahead of whatever story they're planning to tell." Colby nodded, already pulling up his streaming app. "On it. What's the message?" "The truth," Isla said simply. "That a community came together to improve safety. No politics, no agenda, just neighbors helping neighbors." As Colby began streaming, introducing the situation to his growing audience, one of the reporters managed to get inside. She was young, aggressive, clearly looking for controversy. "Is it true the Attorney General is investigating this store for staging a dangerous incident?" she asked, shoving a microphone at Hank. Before he could stammer a response, Isla stepped smoothly between them. "The Attorney General is doing their job ensuring public safety. We welcome any investigation because we have nothing to hide. Every moment was documented, every action was transparent." "But isn't it convenient that you, a safety expert, just happened to be here during a crisis?" the reporter pressed. "I was here because my elderly neighbor asked me to accompany her," Isla replied calmly. "If that's suspicious, then every act of kindness becomes suspect. Is that really the world we want to live in?" The reporter tried another angle. "Sources say extremist groups are targeting this location. Are you concerned about violence?" This was news to the customers still in the store, and worried murmurs spread. But Isla didn't miss a beat. "We're concerned about misinformation and fear-mongering," she said, looking directly at the camera. "This store is safe. This community is strong. Anyone trying to divide us with fear will fail, because we choose trust over terror." The reporter, frustrated by Isla's composure, turned to Rory. "Sir, you're the man who was intoxicated with a weapon. Do you think you should face charges?" Rory flinched, but before he could speak, Fred Thompson stepped forward. The veteran who'd burst in with the water gun earlier was still there, having found unexpected community. "You want to talk about charging people in crisis?" Fred said, his voice shaking with emotion. "This man had a bad day and made a mistake. He owned it, got help, and is making amends. That's what Americans do. We fail, we learn, we get better. You media vultures just want blood for ratings." The confrontation was getting heated when something unexpected happened. Commissioner Walsh, who'd left earlier, walked back in with two other people, a man and a woman in expensive suits, who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom. "Ms. Nguyen," Walsh said, "these are representatives from the Whitman Foundation. They've been watching the situation here and have a proposal." The woman who introduced herself as Director Patricia Morse spoke with practiced authority. "The Whitman Foundation funds innovative community safety programs. What you've achieved here in 3 days is remarkable. We'd like to offer a grant $2 million over 3 years to expand this model to other communities." The room went silent. $2 million was transformative money enough to change everything. But Isla's expression remained cautious. "What are the conditions?" she asked. "Full documentation of methods, quarterly reports, and agreement to train other communities," Morse replied. "We want this replicated nationally." "And who controls the program?" Isla pressed. "The community," Morse said, surprising everyone. "We provide funding and infrastructure, but local communities maintain control. We've learned that top-down approaches fail." Hank was practically vibrating with excitement, but Isla held up a hand. "We need to discuss this as a community. Can you give us time?" "Of course," Morse said. "But decide quickly. Political windows don't stay open long." As the Foundation representatives left, Agent Chen's phone buzzed urgently. He read the message, his face darkening. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "Our monitoring picked up specific chatter. Someone's planning something for tonight. They know about the media presence and want to make a statement." "Who?" Owens asked, immediately shifting into cop mode. "Unknown, but they're local. They mentioned details only someone from this area would know." The store erupted in concerned discussion. Parents worried about safety, business owners worried about property. Everyone worried about their community becoming a flashpoint for violence. But Isla raised her voice just enough to cut through the chaos. "Stop," she said firmly. "This is exactly what they want, fear division neighbors suspecting neighbors. We're not going to give them that." "Then what do we do?" someone asked. "We stay open," Isla replied. We continue as planned. Tomorrow's youth safety class happens on schedule. If we close, if we hide, they win. That's insane, the reporter said, still recording. You're risking lives for principle. No, Isla corrected. We're saving lives through principle. Every time we surrender to fear, extremism grows stronger. Every time we stand together, it weakens. Marcos stepped forward. I'll stay tonight. Keep watch. Me too, said Fred. And me, added Beth. One by one, people volunteered, not out of obligation, but out of ownership. This was their store now, their community, their stand. Even Trent, who'd been so dismissive days ago, raised his hand. I was part of the problem, he said quietly. Let me be part of the solution. As plans formed for an overnight watch, Sarah pulled Isla aside. This is escalating beyond a simple legal matter. You need personal protection. I need community connection, Isla countered. If I separate myself, I become a symbol instead of a neighbor. That's when things get dangerous. Their discussion was interrupted by Colby, whose stream was showing something disturbing. Guys, you need to see this. Someone's doxed Isla. Her address, her history, everything is being posted on extremist forums. The violation was profound. Isla's private life, carefully separated from her public work, was now exposed to anyone with an internet connection and malicious intent. Her modest apartment, her daily routines, her favorite coffee shop, all of it mapped out for potential attackers. We're moving you to a safe house, Agent Chen said immediately. No, Isla replied firmly. That confirms their narrative that I'm a government agent. I stay in my home, but with precautions. That's suicide, Chen protested. That's courage, Mrs. Reed interjected. The elderly woman had been quiet during the discussions, but now she stood with surprising strength. During the civil rights movement, they threatened us too. Doxing wasn't digital then, but they found ways. You know what stopped them communities standing together. Isla's not alone. I'll stay with her, Mrs. Reed continued. An old woman and a young woman having tea. Nothing threatening about that. I'll patrol the neighborhood, Owens offered. We'll set up a rotation, Marcos added. The organic security network that formed was unlike anything Agent Chen had seen in his career. No federal intervention, no official protection detail, just citizens protecting citizens because it was right. As evening approached and people began to disperse, the reporter made one last attempt at controversy. Ms. Nguyen, aren't you afraid? Isla considered the question carefully. Yes, she admitted, surprising everyone with her honesty. Fear is natural when facing threat, but I'm more afraid of what happens if we let fear control us. Every generation faces moments when they must choose between safety and liberty, between comfort and justice. This is our moment. The reporter seemed taken aback by the philosophical response. That's very noble, but what if someone gets hurt? Someone already got hurt, Isla replied. Rory was hurt by isolation and despair. Fred was hurt by untreated trauma. This community was hurt by disconnection and mistrust. We're not choosing between safety and danger, we're choosing between addressing root causes and applying band-aids. As the news crews finally left, chased away by approaching darkness and lack of new drama, the real work began. The overnight watch organized itself with military precision, thanks to Marcos's experience. Shifts were scheduled, communication protocols established, contingency plans developed. But the most powerful moment came when Rory approached Isla privately. I need to tell you something, he said, voice low. The online threats, I recognize some of the language. It sounds like my former brother-in-law, Mike. He's deep into conspiracy theories, blames the government for everything. After the divorce, he blamed me for corrupting his sister with liberal ideas. You think he's planning something? Isla asked. Maybe. He's unstable, but usually just talks. But seeing me in that video, seeing me apologize and change, he'd see that as weakness, betrayal even. Can you reach out to him? Rory shook his head. He blocked me months ago. But he paused, thinking. His son, my nephew Tommy, he's 17. Good kid, nothing like his dad. He might know something. The lead was thin, but better than nothing. Isla shared the information with Agent Chen, who began making discreet inquiries. Meanwhile, the store settled into an uneasy quiet, with volunteers taking their positions for the night watch. Around 9 p.m., as Isla was preparing to leave with Mrs. Reed, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text was simple, but chilling. You destroyed my family. Tonight I return the favor. She showed it to Chen, who immediately began tracing procedures. But Isla noticed something others missed. The area code was local, and the timestamp suggested the sender was close. Very close. They're here, she said quietly to Marcos. Somewhere nearby, watching. The tension ratcheted up palpably. Everyone suddenly became hyper-aware of their surroundings, every shadow potentially hiding a threat. But Isla remained calm, thinking through possibilities. They want fear, she said. They want us scrambling, panicking. So we do the opposite. Continue as normal, but alert. The next hour was excruciating. Every car that passed drew scrutiny. Every person walking by was evaluated. The watchers were themselves being watched, creating a recursive loop of surveillance and suspicion. Then at 10:17 p.m. motion sensors, Marcos had quietly installed detected movement near the store's back entrance. Multiple figures moving with purpose. This was it. The threatened action was beginning. Positions, Marcos said quietly into his radio. The volunteers moved smoothly. No panic, just purposeful preparation. Isla started toward the back, but Chen grabbed her arm. You're the target. Stay central. Stay visible to cameras. She nodded, understanding the logic even as it grated against her instincts. From her position, she could see monitors showing the camera feeds. 3 figures in dark clothing were approaching the back door, one carrying something. Chemical accelerant, Marcos identified. They're planning arson. The situation was critical. A fire would destroy not just the store, but everything they'd built, the community trust, the progress, the hope. But responding with force would escalate, potentially leading to violence. Let me talk to them, Isla said. Absolutely not, Chen replied. But Isla was already moving not toward the back, but to the front door. She stepped outside, clearly visible in the parking lot lights, and called out in a clear voice. Mike Patterson, I know it's you. Your nephew Tommy told us you were hurting. Your family is worried about you. This isn't the answer. The bluff was desperate. Tommy hadn't been contacted yet, but it worked. The figures at the back froze. One of them broke away, circling around toward the front. As he entered the light, his face was visible, mid-40s, angry, desperate, clearly Mike Patterson. You don't know anything about my family, he snarled. You turned my brother-in-law into a weak, apologetic shell. You're destroying everything that makes America strong. I helped your brother-in-law avoid prison or death, Isla replied calmly. He's getting help. He's reconnecting with Sarah. Isn't that what family does, help each other through crisis? Shut up, Mike shouted, pulling something from his pocket. Not a gun, a lighter. This store is a symbol of surrender. It needs to burn. Then burn it, Isla said, shocking everyone. But know that you're not burning a building. You're burning the place where your nephew learned gun safety, where your elderly mother could get help with home security, where veterans like Fred found community instead of isolation. Mike hesitated, the lighter flickering in his hand. You're angry because the world changed and left you behind. Isla continued, taking a slow step forward. I understand that, but burning this won't change anything back. It'll just add arson to your problems. Stop psychoanalyzing me. Mike screamed, but his voice cracked, revealing the pain beneath the anger. It was then that Rory stepped out of the store. Mike's attention snapped to his former brother-in-law, rage flaring anew. But Rory didn't retreat. "Mike," he said simply, "I'm sorry." The two words hung in the air like a prayer. "I'm sorry I wasn't the brother-in-law you wanted. Sorry I couldn't save your sister's marriage to me. Sorry I fell apart and embarrassed the family. But I'm getting help now, and you can too." Mike's hand shook the lighter, wavering. His two companions had disappeared, fled, when the situation shifted from simple arson to complex, emotional confrontation. He stood alone, isolated, the very thing he feared made manifest by his own actions. "They all left you," Isla observed gently. "Just like you feel everyone else has. But we're still here. Rory's still here. You don't have to be alone in this." The lighter fell from Mike's hand, clattering on the asphalt. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing deep, wrenching sobs of someone who'd held too much pain for too long. Rory moved forward, kneeling beside the man who'd planned to burn down the store, and put an arm around him. "It's okay," Rory said quietly. "We're going to get through this." The scene was surreal, attempted arsonist being comforted by intended victim, surrounded by people who'd volunteered to prevent violence, now witnessing redemption. Agent Chen stood down the tactical team he'd quietly assembled. Deputy Owens lowered his hand from his service weapon. The crisis had passed not through force, but through connection. Mike would still face charges. Attempted arson was serious, but Sarah was already discussing reduced charges in exchange for mental health treatment. The pattern of intervention over incarceration was establishing itself, creating a new model for community justice. As Mike was led away by Deputy Owens, firmly but not roughly, Isla found herself surrounded by the volunteers. They looked at her with something approaching awe, but she quickly redirected their attention. "Everyone did their job," she said. "Marco spotted the threat. Chen coordinated response. Rory provided the breakthrough. This wasn't about one person, it was about community. But you stood out there exposed, knowing they wanted to hurt you," Beth pointed out. "Because I trusted all of you to have my back," Isla replied. "That's what community means, not just living near each other, but living for each other." The profound truth of that statement settled over the group as they began to disperse for the night. The immediate threat was over, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. The Attorney General's investigation still loomed. The extremist attention remained. The hard work of transformation continued. As Isla finally prepared to leave with Mrs. Reed, Agent Chen approached one last time. "What you did tonight was either brilliant or insane." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Isla replied. "The safe choice would have let Mike burn the store. The risky choice saved both the store and Mike. Which outcome serves the community better?" Chen had no answer for that. He watched as Isla helped Mrs. Reed into her car, two women heading home, after preventing catastrophe through nothing more than words and courage. His entire career had been built on force and procedure, but tonight he'd witnessed something different: power through vulnerability, strength through compassion. The store stood intact, its lights still on, a beacon in the darkness. Inside, volunteers continued their watch, but the atmosphere had shifted from fear to determination. They'd faced the threat and survived not through violence, but through values. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Attorney General would continue investigating. The media would continue sensationalizing. The extremists would continue threatening. But tonight, A community had proved that connection could triumph over chaos, that neighbors protecting neighbors was more powerful than any external force. The morning arrived with an unseasonable frost that painted the store windows with delicate patterns, but inside High Ridge Outfitters, the atmosphere was anything but delicate. Isla arrived at 6 a.m. to find Hank already there, surrounded by papers, his face haggard from a sleepless night spent preparing for the Attorney General's investigation that would begin in just 3 hours. "They sent over their witness list," he said, without preamble, sliding a document across the counter. "They're deposing everyone, even customers who were just browsing that day. They're treating this like a conspiracy." Isla scanned the list, noting names she recognized, and several she didn't. One name made her pause: Detective Ray Morrison from the state police, Beth's uncle. She hadn't been aware he'd been assigned to the case. "Beth doesn't know," Hank said, noticing her reaction. "Her uncle's been investigating us without telling her. She's about to find out her family's been working against her." Before Isla could respond, Beth herself walked in, carrying coffee and wearing the determined expression of someone ready to fight. "Morning. I've reorganized all our safety documentation and created a timeline of every improvement we've made. They want to paint us as negligent. Let them try to argue with facts." The irony of her enthusiasm, given what she was about to discover, made Isla's chest tighten. But there was no time to soften the blow. A black sedan pulled up outside, and Detective Morrison stepped out, his resemblance to Beth unmistakable even from a distance. Beth's coffee cup hit the floor, the crash echoing through the store as brown liquid spread across the tiles she'd mopped just yesterday. "Uncle Ray." Her voice was barely a whisper, disbelief and betrayal warring on her face. Morrison entered the store with 2 other officials, his expression professionally neutral until he saw his niece. Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or shame, before the mask reasserted itself. "Beth, I didn't know you worked here," he said, the lie transparent to everyone present. "You've known for a week," Beth replied, her voice gaining strength. "Mom told you at Sunday dinner. You sat there eating her pot roast while investigating my workplace, and you didn't say a word." "I had a job to do," Morrison said stiffly. "This isn't personal." "Everything's personal when it's family," Beth shot back. "But I guess you choose your job over family, just like Dad always said you would." The reference to some old family wound made Morrison flinch, but before he could respond, Sarah arrived with a litigation team that looked like they'd stepped out of a legal thriller, 3 lawyers in sharp suits carrying boxes of documents and tablets loaded with case law. "Detective Morrison," Sarah said coolly. "I'm representing High Ridge Outfitters. I trust you've reviewed our submitted evidence showing that every action taken was in compliance with state law and in fact exceeded required safety standards." "We're here to determine if the incident was staged," Morrison replied, regaining his professional composure. "The coincidence of Ms. Nguyen's presence is suspicious." "Coincidence isn't conspiracy," Sarah countered. "Unless you have evidence of premeditation, this investigation is harassment." The legal sparring continued as more people arrived for their depositions. Colby showed up with his phone and a laptop containing every second of footage from that day. Marcos brought military-style documentation of everything he'd observed. Even Mrs. Reed came wearing her best dress and carrying a purse that contained, she would later reveal, a recorder of her own. She didn't trust the government to tell the truth about what was said. But the most dramatic arrival was Rory, accompanied not just by his sister, but by Mike Patterson, out on bail and looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in one night. The attempted arsonist's presence caused immediate tension. "What's he doing here?" Morrison demanded. "He's here to testify," Sarah said simply, "about how this store's transformation prevented him from making the worst mistake of his life." about how compassion succeeded where punishment would have failed. "He tried to burn the place down," Morrison protested. "And they stopped him with words instead of bullets," Mike said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, broken. "Any other store, I'd be dead or in prison for 20 years. These people saved my life by seeing past my anger to my pain." Morrison looked uncomfortable with this narrative disruption. He'd come expecting to find evidence of staging and manipulation. Instead, he was confronting genuine human transformation. The depositions began in the store's back office, which had been converted into a makeshift legal chamber. Isla was scheduled third after Hank and Beth, but she could hear raised voices through the thin walls, Beth defending her new position, her uncle questioning her qualifications, family dynamics playing out in legal language. While waiting, Isla noticed something troubling on Colby's stream. He was broadcasting the gathering as usual, but the comments were different, organized, coordinated. Someone was directing trolls to flood the chat with specific messages about government overreach and staged events. The digital attack was sophisticated, suggesting professional involvement. "We're being targeted by a disinformation campaign," she told Agent Chen, who'd maintained his presence despite the official investigation. Chen looked at the stream, his expression darkening. "Those IP addresses. Some are coming from overseas. This isn't just local extremists anymore. Someone's weaponizing this situation." Before they could investigate further, shouting erupted from the office. Beth burst out, tears streaming down her face, her uncle following. "You're trying to destroy everything we've built because you can't stand that we did it without official approval," she accused. "I'm trying to determine the truth," Morrison insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The truth is that you've always resented our side of the family for being working class," Beth said, years of suppressed family tension erupting. "Now that I'm actually making a difference, you can't stand it. You need us to fail to prove you were right to look down on us." The personal attack made Morrison step back, genuinely shaken. Other family members' words echoed in Beth's accusation, decades of class division within their extended family, laid bare in a gun store in front of state investigators. It was Mrs. Reed who intervened, approaching Morrison with grandmother authority. "Young man, I don't know your family troubles, but I know what I saw. That girl," she pointed at Beth, "acted with more professionalism and courage than people twice her age. If you can't see past your prejudices to recognize competence, then you're the one who shouldn't be investigating." The elderly woman's intervention created a pause that Isla used strategically. "Detective Morrison, would you like to see something? Not testimony, not argument, just observation." Morrison, off balance from the personal attacks, nodded warily. Isla gestured to the front of the store, where despite the investigation, customers were beginning to arrive for the scheduled youth safety class. Parents with teenagers, younger children with guardians, all arriving despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it. "Watch," Isla said simply. Over the next 30 minutes, Morrison observed Beth seamlessly managing the arriving families, checking documentation, explaining safety protocols, handling concerned parents' questions with expertise that belied her short tenure. He watched Marcos teaching basic safety to wide-eyed children with patience and clarity. He watched Trent, the formerly dismissive clerk, kneeling to explain to a young girl why safety rules existed, using language appropriate for her age. "This transformation happened in less than a week," Isla told Morrison quietly. "Do you really think that could be staged?" Morrison's carefully constructed case was crumbling before his eyes. But rather than admit error, he doubled down. Anyone can put on a show when they know they're being watched. It was then that Tyler, the teenager from the first safety class, approached with his father, a man Isla hadn't met before. The father was everything his son wasn't: large, intimidating, wearing clothing that suggested manual labor and hard opinions. "You the woman teaching my boy to be weak," the father demanded, his voice carrying across the store. Everyone tensed. This was exactly the kind of confrontation that could destroy everything they'd built. Morrison watched with interest, perhaps hoping for an incident that would support his case. "I'm teaching your son to be thoughtful," Isla replied calmly. "There's nothing weak about preventing violence." "Violence is what protects us," the father countered. "My boy needs to be ready to fight, not talk." "Dad, please," Tyler said, embarrassed. "She's right about—" "Quiet," his father snapped. Then to Isla, "You're filling his head with liberal nonsense about de-escalation and conversation. The real world doesn't work that way." "The real world is exactly where I learned these skills," Isla replied. "Would you like me to demonstrate?" The challenge hung in the air. The father, whose name was Carl, stood 6'4" and weighed at least 250. The idea that Isla could demonstrate anything physical against him seemed absurd. "You're going to fight me?" Carl asked, incredulous. "No," Isla said. "I'm going to show you how unnecessary fighting is." "Beth, may I borrow your training pistol?" Beth handed over the bright blue plastic training weapon they used for safety demonstrations. Isla checked it, obviously showing everyone it was harmless, then handed it to Carl. "Point it at me," she instructed. "Simulate a threat." Carl hesitated, then raised the training weapon, in a movement so smooth it seemed like water flowing. Isla stepped offline, redirected his arm, and suddenly Carl found himself off balance with the training weapon pointed at the floor. She hadn't struck him, hadn't wrestled him. She'd simply used his own momentum against him. "That's technique," she said. "Now let me show you something more important." She reset, having Carl point the weapon again. This time, instead of moving, she spoke. "Carl, your son Tyler told me you served in Iraq. Second tour was rough. IED took out half your squad. That's why you're so protective, isn't it? You've seen what violence does, and you want him prepared." Carl's hand shook. The training weapon lowered slightly. "How did you Tyler shouldn't have—" "He's proud of you," Isla continued. "But he's also scared. Not of external threats, but of disappointing you. He wants to be strong like you, but strength isn't just about fighting. You know that. You've seen 18-year-olds with guns who were dangerous because they were scared, not strong." The weapon lowered completely. Carl's tough facade cracked, revealing the fear and pain beneath. I need him to be safe." "Safety comes from judgment, not just firepower," Isla said gently. "You survived Iraq not because you were the toughest, but because you were smart. That's what we're teaching, the same survival skills that kept you alive, just applied to civilian life." Carl stood there for a long moment, processing. Then he did something no one expected. He apologized. "I'm sorry. I came in here ready to fight because I was scared. You're right. That's exactly what I don't want him to learn." The moment was powerful, but Morrison seized on it differently. "So you research people, manipulate them with personal information." "Tyler mentioned his father's service during our first class," Isla explained. "I remembered because I respect veterans. Using relevant information to prevent conflict isn't manipulation, it's intelligence." "It's exactly the kind of tactic someone would use if they were staging events," Morrison pressed. Sarah immediately objected. "Detective, you're reaching. Your remembering personal details is called being a good teacher, not conspiracy." The argument was heating up when Agent Chen's phone buzzed urgently. He read the message, his face going pale. "We have a problem. A much bigger problem." He showed the message to Isla and Morrison. "Credible threat of mass shooting event at gun store location today. Multiple sources confirm. Evacuate immediately." The store erupted in controlled chaos. Parents grabbed children. Marcos began coordinating evacuation procedures they'd only just established. Beth called 911 while simultaneously guiding people to exits. But Morrison stood frozen, the reality of actual danger versus his theoretical investigation creating cognitive dissonance. "This could be another manipulation," he said weakly. "Are you willing to bet lives on that?" Isla asked sharply. "Your niece's life." That snapped him into action. Morrison began helping with evacuation, his police training finally overriding his investigative agenda. Within minutes, the store was empty except for essential personnel and law enforcement. "I'm staying," Hank declared. "This is my store." "Me too," Beth added, standing beside her boss. "If there's a real threat, you need to leave," Morrison told his niece, genuine concern breaking through. "Now you care," Beth asked bitterly. "When it's danger, you understand. What about the danger of destroying people's livelihoods with false accusations?" Before Morrison could respond, Colby pointed to his stream. "Guys, look at this." Someone in the chat had posted, "It's happening. Check the news." They turned on the store's TV to find breaking news, but not about their store. Another gun store 2 counties over was under attack. An active shooter situation was unfolding live, with casualties already reported. The similarity was chilling, a store that had recently implemented new safety measures that had received positive media attention, now under assault. "It's coordinated," Chen said grimly. "Someone's targeting reformed gun stores, places that represent change." "Why?" Morrison asked, his investigation forgotten in the face of real crisis. "Because change threatens extremists more than opposition," Isla explained. "We're proving their narratives wrong, showing that responsibility and rights can coexist. That makes us targets." The reality of the situation settled over everyone like a suffocating blanket. They weren't just dealing with local anger or isolated extremism, they were facing organized opposition to progress itself. "We need to coordinate with the other store," Marcos said, already pulling up tactical communications. "Share intelligence protection strategies. I'll contact their owner." Hank offered his business competition forgotten in the face of shared threat. The next hour was a blur of activity. Law enforcement descended on the store, but not as investigators, as protectors. Morrison found himself working alongside the people he'd been investigating, the immediate threat dissolving artificial boundaries. During a brief lull, Beth approached her uncle. "Remember when I was 8? That man at the park who scared me? You didn't investigate or interrogate. You just protected me. That's the uncle I needed today." Morrison's professional mask finally cracked completely. "Beth, I thought I was protecting you. From being associated with controversy from career damage, I don't need protection from purpose," Beth interrupted. "I need support for it." Their reconciliation was interrupted by unexpected arrivals. The youth who'd been evacuated were returning along with their parents, not fleeing, but standing ground. "We're not letting fear win," Carl said, Tyler beside him. "If they want to scare us away from learning safety, then learning safety becomes resistance." One by one, families filed back in. The scheduled class had become something more, a statement of defiance against extremism. Morrison watched in amazement as the community he'd been investigating for staging events proved their authenticity through courage. "Detective Morrison," Isla said, approaching him. "You wanted to know if this was real or staged. Here's your answer. No one stages this. No one scripts parents bringing children back to a threatened location because they believe in something bigger than fear." Morrison nodded slowly. "I need to make a call. To my superiors. This investigation needs to end." As he stepped away to make the call, Sarah pulled Isla aside. "The Attorney General isn't going to give up easily. Political careers are staked on this." "Then we make it politically impossible to continue," Isla replied. Colby, how many viewers? 47,000 and climbing, he reported. News outlets are picking up the stream. We're trending nationally. Isla made a decision. She stepped in front of Colby's camera, addressing not just his audience, but the larger world now watching. What you're witnessing isn't about guns, she said, her voice clear and strong. It's about community. It's about choosing growth over stagnation, connection over isolation, hope over fear. Extremists want us divided because division makes us weak. But look around former antagonists working together, families standing firm, a community refusing to break. This is what America actually looks like when we remember we're neighbors first, everything else a second. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in supporting the store, condemning the investigation, praising the community's courage. News outlets began changing their narrative from suspicious incident to community resilience. The Attorney General's office, monitoring public sentiment, saw their case evaporating in real time. But the day's drama wasn't over. Agent Chen received another update. The shooter at the other store had been subdued, but not before leaving a manifesto. In it, High Ridge Outfitters was named as the next target, with specific mention of Isla as a priority target for elimination. We're shutting down, Morrison said immediately. Everyone out, now. No, Isla said firmly. That's exactly what they want. We stay open, we finish the class, we show them that terrorism doesn't work. That's insane, Morrison protested. That's necessary, Isla countered. Every time we surrender to threats, they grow stronger. We have law enforcement here, we have community support, we have global attention. If not now, when do we stand? The debate that followed was intense, but brief. In the end, it was Mrs. Reed who settled it. I'm 73 years old. I've lived through wars, riots, and more threats than I can count. You know what I learned running from bullies just makes them chase harder. I'm staying. And one by one, others committed. Not everyone, some parents understandably chose to leave with their children, but enough stayed to make a statement. The youth safety class would continue with armed law enforcement present, but unobtrusive, the community refusing to let fear dictate terms. Morrison watched all of this unfold with growing respect and diminishing resistance. Finally, he approached Isla. I owe you an apology. All of you. I came here looking for fraud and found this, whatever this is. This is democracy in action, Isla replied. Messy, dangerous sometimes, but ultimately about people choosing their path rather than having it chosen for them. The class proceeded with surreal normalcy, teenagers learning proper stance, while SWAT members secured the perimeter, parents asking questions about safe storage, while helicopters circled overhead, Beth teaching basic safety rules, while her uncle stood guard. Then, at 3:47 p.m., exactly 1 week after the original incident, something remarkable happened. Avery Park arrived for her follow-up inspection as scheduled despite everything. She walked through the chaos of protection and persistence, clipboard in hand, conducting her review as if it were any other day. Full compliance, she announced after an hour. Every citation addressed, every requirement exceeded. High Ridge Outfitters is officially the safest gun store in the state. The announcement felt anticlimactic given the circumstances, but it mattered. Official validation of their transformation, proof that change was possible, that responsibility and rights could coexist. Morrison watched his case officially dissolve the investigation's premise proven false by documented evidence. As evening approached and the immediate threat level decreased, the would-be attacker captured 3 towns away, people began to disperse. But not with fear or exhaustion, with purpose. The day's events had galvanized something that hadn't existed a week ago, a true community forged in crisis, but sustained by choice. Tyler approached Isla as she prepared to leave. "Ms. Nguyen, my dad wants to know if you'd consider teaching more than just safety, like conflict resolution and stuff. He says you understand things he learned in war but could never put into words." "Tell your father I'd be honored," Isla replied. "Real strength isn't about being ready to fight. It's about being strong enough not to need to." As the sun set on a day that had threatened disaster but delivered transformation, the store stood intact, its lights beacon bright against gathering darkness. The Attorney General's investigation would officially close the next day. The extremist threats would continue, but decrease the community programs would expand beyond anyone's imagination. But in that moment, as Isla helped Mrs. Reed to her car once again, as Beth reconciled with her uncle, as Hank shook hands with former competitors now turned allies, as Colby streamed hope instead of hate to tens of thousands, the victory was simple and profound. They had chosen courage over fear together, over apart progress, over paralysis. The transformation that had begun with mockery and nearly ended in flames had become something neither side had expected, a model for how America could heal itself, one community at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of grace at a time. 6 months had passed since the week that changed everything, and High Ridge Outfitters bore little resemblance to the store where Isla had first been mocked for her appearance. The morning sun streamed through new windows, bulletproof now, but you'd never know it, illuminating a space that had become the unofficial heart of the community. Isla stood in the training room they'd added to the back, preparing for what would be the most important presentation of her life, though she didn't know it yet. The Whitman Foundation had delivered on their promise, and the $2 million grant had transformed not just the store, but the entire approach to gun safety in 3 states. Today, representatives from the Department of Justice were coming to evaluate the program for potential federal adoption. If successful, the High Ridge model, as it had come to be known, would become national policy. Beth entered the training room, carrying a tablet, her confidence now natural rather than forced. The promotion Hank had given her during the crisis had evolved into something more. She was now Director of Safety Education, managing a team of 12 instructors across 4 locations. "They're here," she said simply, but her expression was troubled. "And they brought someone unexpected." Before Isla could ask who, the door opened, and a familiar figure walked in, Detective Ray Morrison, Beth's uncle. But he wasn't wearing his state police uniform. Instead, he wore a federal badge and the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd been promoted significantly. "Hello, Isla," Morrison said, his tone unreadable. "I'm now Deputy Director of the DOJ's Community Safety Initiative. I'll be conducting today's evaluation." The irony was sharp enough to cut. The man who'd tried to prove their transformation was fake now held the power to make it federal policy. Beth stood frozen between her professional role and personal history, the family dynamics that had exploded 6 months ago still echoing in the silence. Sorry, Deputy Director Morrison," Isla said calmly. "Welcome back to High Ridge." "It's just Ray now," he said, surprising everyone. "I'm not here as an investigator or an enforcer. I'm here because what you've built worked so well that even skeptics like me had to admit we were wrong. The question is whether it can scale." Hank entered, then followed by an entourage that made the room suddenly feel small. Along with the federal officials were representatives from major gun manufacturers, national safety organizations, and even international observers. The Canadian and UK governments had sent people to study what they called the American Miracle of High Ridge. But the most surprising attendee was someone no one had expected to see again, Colby Chen, who'd been absent for the past 3 months. He looked different, older somehow, wearing a suit instead of his usual tactical gear costume, and carrying professional camera equipment rather than just his phone. "I'm here with PBS," he explained, catching everyone's surprised looks. "They hired me to document community transformation stories. Turns out my streaming style translates well to documentary work. Today's evaluation is going to be part of a national broadcast." The weight of the moment settled on everyone. This wasn't just about their store anymore, it was about proving that change was possible on a scale no one had imagined when Isla first walked through their door. "Where would you like to start?" Isla asked Morrison. "With the numbers," he replied, pulling out a thick folder. "Your incident rate is down 93%. Your safety certification completion is up 400%. But numbers don't tell the whole story. I want to see the actual implementation." As if on cue, the morning's first safety class began arriving. But these weren't typical students, they were gang members part of an outreach program Isla had developed with local law enforcement. Young men and women who'd been on the streets were here to learn not just gun safety, but conflict resolution. The lead participant was Jerome Washington, 22, with facial tattoos that told stories of violence and survival. 6 months ago, he would have been barred from the store. Today, he was here as a student leader, helping to teach younger members of his community. "Ms. Nguyen," Jerome said, approaching with a respect that had been hard-earned over months of work. "My cousin Deshawn is nervous about being here. His brother was shot by someone who bought their gun from a store like this." "Bring him over," Isla said gently. "Let's talk." Deshawn was 16, skinny, trying to look tough, but fear visible in his eyes. He stood before Isla with the defensive posture of someone who'd learned that vulnerability meant danger. "You know what this place used to be?" Isla asked him. "A gun store?" Deshawn answered, suspicion in his voice. "A place of judgment," Isla corrected. "Where people like you and me would have been looked at with suspicion, maybe mockery. Where assumptions ruled over understanding. But you know what changed it?" Deshawn shook his head. "One moment of crisis where everyone realized that our divisions were killing us, that safety wasn't about us versus them, but about all of us together." "Your brother, was he killed by someone legal or illegal?" "Legal," Deshawn admitted quietly. "Bought it legally, shot him over a parking space." "So the problem wasn't the gun or the store," Isla said. "It was the absence of connection, the failure to see each other as human. That's what we're fixing here." Morrison watched this interaction closely, taking notes. But his observation was interrupted by commotion at the front door. A group of protesters had arrived carrying signs reading "Compromised Rights" and "Federal Overreach." Leading them was someone unexpected, Mike Patterson, the man who'd tried to burn down the store 6 months ago. But Mike wasn't here as a threat. His signs were different from the others, reading "Reformed but not controlled" and "Community Choice, not Federal Force." He'd become an advocate for local solutions over federal mandates, his own transformation making him a complex voice in the debate. "I don't support federal takeover," Mike announced to anyone listening, including Colby's PBS cameras. "But I support what this store has become. There's a difference between community choice and government force." The nuance of his position created confusion among both his fellow protesters and the federal officials. Here was a man who'd tried to commit arson, now arguing for a middle path that neither side had fully considered. Morrison approached Mike directly. "Mr. Patterson, you tried to destroy this place. Now you're defending it." "I'm defending the right of communities to choose their path," Mike clarified. "What Isla and the others built here came from us, not from Washington. The moment you make it mandatory, you kill what makes it work." This philosophical challenge to the federal adoption plan created unexpected tension. The DOJ officials had come expecting simple evaluation of a successful program. Instead, they were confronting fundamental questions about the nature of change, whether it could be mandated or must be chosen. Isla seized the moment to demonstrate rather than debate. "Let me show you all something," she said, leading the entire group officials, protesters, students, everyone to the range area. There, Marcos had set up an elaborate scenario with multiple decision points. It wasn't about marksmanship, but about judgment, when to engage, when to retreat, when to de-escalate. She selected 2 participants, Jerome, the gang member, and one of the federal officials, Assistant Director Patricia Hughes. "Work together," Isla instructed. "Jerome will provide street knowledge. Director Hughes will provide legal framework. Navigate the scenario as partners." The pairing was intentionally provocative, street criminal, and federal law enforcement forced to collaborate. At first, they struggled their different perspectives, creating conflict. But as the scenario progressed, something shifted. Jerome's understanding of street dynamics helped Hughes recognize threats she would have missed. Hughes' knowledge of legal boundaries helped Jerome understand consequences he hadn't considered. By the end, they were working seamlessly, each respecting the other's expertise. The demonstration was powerful, but Mike Patterson raised an important objection. "That's beautiful in practice, but you can't force that kind of cooperation. It has to grow naturally." He's right. Unexpected support came from Mrs. Reed, who'd continued attending every safety class despite mastering the material months ago. "I've watched this community change. It wasn't because someone made us. It was because we chose to." Morrison found himself in an uncomfortable position. His job was to evaluate the program for federal adoption, but the very community that had created it was arguing against mandate. He turned to his niece. "Beth, you've been part of this from the beginning. What do you think?" Beth considered, carefully aware that her answer would carry weight, not just professionally, but personally. "I think," she said slowly, "that the federal government should support but not mandate. Provide funding, resources, training, but let communities choose implementation. Make it attractive to adopt, not required." "That's not how federal programs work," Hughes objected. "We need standardization, consistency, measurable metrics." "You need dead bodies to stop piling up," Jerome said bluntly, his street authenticity cutting through bureaucratic language. "This place helped my crew more in 6 months than 20 years of federal programs. You know why, because it was our choice." The debate was escalating when Tyler and his father, Carl, arrived for their weekly session. They'd become regulars, their relationship transformed from confrontation to collaboration through the classes. But today, Carl was agitated. "Is it true?" he demanded, looking at the federal officials. "You're going to make this mandatory, force every gun store to follow federal rules." "We're evaluating," Morrison began. "You're taking something that works because it's voluntary and making it fail by forcing it," Carl interrupted. "I'm a conservative, voted against every gun law for 20 years. I support this program because I chose it. You make it mandatory, I'm out, and so is half this community." The political reality landed hard. The very success that made the program attractive for federal adoption also depended on voluntary participation. Morrison looked at Isla with something approaching desperation. "Help me understand," he said. "How do we scale success without standardization?" Isla moved to the whiteboard that had become a fixture in the training room where countless safety lessons had been diagrammed. She drew a simple image, a seed growing into a tree. "You don't scale by replication," she explained. "You scale by inspiration." Every community has different needs, different dynamics, different wounds to heal. High Ridge needed to bridge class divisions and overcome mockery. Other places might need to address racial tensions, urban versus rural divides, or generational conflicts. She drew more trees, each different. Provide the seeds funding training resources, but let each community grow their own tree. Some will be oak, some pine, some fruit trees. The forest is stronger for the diversity. That's beautiful philosophy, Hughes said, but I need practical policy. Then watch, Isla replied, gesturing to the main floor where something remarkable was happening. The morning protesters had merged with the safety class. Former adversaries were talking, finding common ground in unexpected places. Mike Patterson was explaining to Jerome how his path from extremism to advocacy mirrored Jerome's path from gang violence to community leadership. Federal officials were listening to street wisdom, while gang members absorbed legal knowledge. Marcos had quietly started a practical exercise teaching both protesters and students basic first aid, something everyone could agree was valuable. Within minutes, people who'd arrived as opponents were working together to practice emergency response. This is what organic growth looks like, Isla told Morrison. You can't mandate this. You can only create conditions where it might happen. Colby was capturing everything, his documentary instincts recognizing historic moments. But he noticed something others missed, a young woman in the corner, watching everything with unusual intensity, taking notes, in what appeared to be Arabic. "Who's that?" he asked Beth quietly. "Amira Hassan," Beth replied. "She's from the State Department. There's international interest in our model. Apparently what we're doing here has implications for conflict resolution in places you wouldn't expect." The global significance of their local experiment added another layer of complexity. Morrison was no longer just evaluating a domestic program, but something with international ramifications. Then Fred Thompson arrived, the veteran with PTSD, who'd burst in with a water gun 6 months ago. He now co-led the veterans support group that met weekly at the store. With him were 8 other veterans, all dealing with various levels of trauma, all finding healing through community rather than isolation. "Deputy Director," Fred addressed Morrison formally, his military bearing evident. "I served 3 tours defending America. I came home broken, angry, dangerous. Traditional federal programs failed me. The VA failed me. This place saved me. Not because of policies or procedures, but because people saw me as human when I couldn't see it myself." His words carried weight that no statistics could match. Morrison himself, a veteran, understood the significance of Fred's testimony. But Hughes remained skeptical. "Individual success stories don't make policy," she said. "We need scalable systems." "Then let me show you a system," Hank said, speaking up for the first time. The store owner had been quiet during the evaluation, letting others lead. But now he pulled out his laptop, displaying spreadsheets and graphs. "6 months ago, I was barely breaking even, cutting corners to survive. Today, I run 4 locations, employ 43 people, and have a waiting list for safety classes. Not because of mandates, but because of market demand. People want what we're offering. Other stores are asking to learn our methods. The free market is scaling this faster than any federal program could." The capitalist argument from someone who'd nearly lost everything to corner cutting carried unexpected weight. Federal officials who'd dismissed community arguments couldn't as easily dismiss economic ones. "Show me the other locations," Morrison requested. The group moved to the conference room, where video screens showed live feeds from the 3 other stores that had adopted the High Ridge model. Each was different, adapted to local needs. The urban location focused on gang intervention. The rural one emphasized hunting safety and generational tradition. The suburban store bridged political divides through family programs. "Same principles, different applications," Beth explained. "Each store maintains core safety standards but implements them through local culture." Sarah arrived then, having flown in from Denver, where she'd been helping establish legal frameworks for community-based safety programs. With her was someone unexpected, the Attorney General, who'd tried to prosecute them 6 months ago. "Ms. Nguyen," Attorney General Richards said, his expression humble. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about everything. Your model has reduced gun violence in our state by 30%. I'm here to publicly support federal backing, but not federal control of programs like yours." The political reversal was stunning. The man who'd tried to destroy them was now their advocate. But Isla remained cautious. "What changed your mind?" she asked directly. "My son," Richards admitted. "He was having problems, anger issues. Traditional therapy wasn't working. He attended one of your youth programs not knowing who you were or our history. He came home changed. When he told me about this amazing instructor named Isla, who taught him that strength meant helping others, I realized I'd nearly destroyed something precious." The personal testimony from a former enemy created a powerful moment, but it was interrupted by urgent news. Colby's phone buzzed with a breaking alert. Another mass shooting, this time at a school 3 states away. The room fell silent, the weight of ongoing tragedy overshadowing their local success. "This is why we need federal action," Hughes said quietly. "Children are dying while we debate philosophy. Children are dying because we've treated symptoms instead of causes," Isla responded. "Every mass shooter starts as a person in pain who can't find connection. We're preventing those disconnections from becoming tragedies." "But not fast enough," Hughes countered. "Show me a faster way that actually works," Isla challenged. "Federal programs have existed for decades. Has violence decreased? We've reduced it 30% in 6 months through voluntary community action. Give us resources, not requirements, and watch what happens." Morrison stood up, decision made. "I'm recommending a hybrid approach. Federal funding and resources available to communities that choose to implement safety programs. Mandatory minimum standards, but voluntary participation. Communities that join get support. Those that don't face no penalties except missing opportunities." "That's not enough," Hughes objected. "It's a start," Morrison replied. "And starts are better than stalls." The compromise wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the federal team prepared to leave, Morrison pulled Beth aside for a private moment. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you, about this place, about everything. You've become something I never could, someone who changes lives instead of just investigating them." "You changed too, Uncle Ray," Beth replied. 6 months ago you couldn't see past your assumptions. Now you're helping spread what we've built. That's growth." Their reconciliation was genuine family wounds healing through shared purpose, but the day's most powerful moment was yet to come. As the evaluation concluded and people began dispersing, a young man entered the store. Quiet, nervous, clearly struggling with something. He approached Isla hesitantly. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "But 6 months ago, I was planning something terrible. I had guns, had a plan, had nothing left to lose. Then I saw the video of you stopping that drunk man. The way you saw him as human even when he was dangerous. It made me think maybe someone could see me that way too." The confession hung in the air, heavy with implication. This young man had been planning a mass shooting prevented not by law enforcement or federal programs, but by witnessing compassion in action. "I got help," he continued. "Sold the guns, started therapy, found community. I'm alive because of what you did that day. So are the people I would have hurt." Isla felt tears she rarely allowed herself. "What's your name?" "David. David Chen. Agent Chen's son, actually." The revelation stunned everyone. The FBI agent who'd been protecting them had a son who'd been planning violence, saved by their example. Chen himself entered, then having waited outside while his son spoke. "This is why I stayed involved," Chen said, his professional composure cracking. "You saved my son's life without knowing he existed. How do you scale that? How do you make policy from grace?" "You don't," Isla replied. "You create spaces where grace can happen. You fund communities choosing compassion. You support people building bridges. You can't mandate miracles, but you can water the ground where they might grow." The federal evaluation officially ended with Morrison's recommendation for hybrid implementation, federal support for voluntary community programs. It wasn't everything advocates wanted, but it was more than skeptics expected. Within a year, 300 communities would adopt variations of the High Ridge model, each unique but united in principles of respect, connection, and chosen change. But the immediate moment was more personal. As the sun set on the day of evaluation, the store filled with its regular evening crowd, veterans, finding peace, youth, finding purpose, families, finding connection, former enemies, finding friendship. The transformation that had begun with mockery had evolved into a movement, but at its heart remained something simple, people choosing to see each other as human. Colby ended his documentary filming with a long shot of the store lights warm against the evening sky. His narration recorded later would become famous. "They laughed when she walked into a gun store. 6 months later, she'd changed not just that store, but the entire conversation about safety in America. Not through force or law or mandate, but through the radical act of treating everyone, even those who mocked her, with dignity." The last scene he captured was Isla helping Mrs. Reed to her car, the same simple act of kindness that had brought her to the store that first day. But now Mrs. Reed wasn't just a neighbor needing help. She was part of a community that had learned to help itself. "Same time next week?" Mrs. Reed asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Isla replied. As they drove away, the store remained lit open for evening classes. Beth ran youth programs while Marcos taught veterans. Hank discussed business with other store owners wanting to transform. Sarah provided legal guidance, while Morrison observed learning how federal support could enable rather than control. The transformation was complete, but ongoing, ended but never finished. High Ridge Outfitters had become what America itself aspired to be, a place where different people could find common ground, where safety came through connection rather than isolation, where change happened through choice rather than force. 6 months earlier, they'd laughed at a quiet woman in a thrift store jacket. Now that same woman had shown them and the nation that real strength wasn't about weapons or laws or power. It was about having the courage to see others as they could be, not just as they were. It was about building communities one conversation at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of grace at a time. The revolution hadn't come through conflict, but through compassion. And it had started with something as simple as refusing to meet mockery with anger, choosing instead to demonstrate that competence and kindness could triumph over cynicism and fear. As the documentary would later conclude, what happened at High Ridge Outfitters proved that America's gun debate didn't need winners and losers. It needed neighbors. And sometimes creating neighbors out of strangers required nothing more than one person willing to stand in the gap with patience, wisdom, and an unshakable belief that people were capable of becoming better than their worst moments. The store still stands today, still teaching, still transforming, still proving that the most powerful weapon in preventing violence isn't legislation or enforcement, it's community. And it all began because one woman walked through a door, absorbed the laughter, and chose to teach rather than fight.